long before the pyramids and spectacular temples that have come to symbolize ancient Egypt, King Narmer began the first dynasty of pharaohs. For more than 3,000 years, 345 pharaohs would rule Egypt. Some achieved glory and fame that still resound today. Among them, the pharaoh Djoser.
Djoser marked a turning point in the history of ancient Egypt.
He was more than a king, he was a god.
What do we know about the life of this pharaoh, who laid the foundations for pharaonic civilization like no one before him?
The pyramid represents the king ascending to resurrect in the afterlife.
His reign was short, but during his time, he had the foresight to build a gigantic funerary complex.
You have to imagine 5,000 years ago that there were 4 colossal statues standing here.
Now, through insights and exceptional access from international experts, you're about to experience the true story of a ruler made immortal by his legend.
He was able to achieve his dreams.
We are going deeper and deeper underneath the step pyramid of Djoser.
Here are the last secrets of the unique story
It's fascinating.
of Pharaoh Djoser, a king whose life transformed ancient Egypt and changed the course of history. Saqqara. Here sits the oldest pyramid in ancient Egypt, but also the most mysterious. This architectural jewel, which is unique in the world, was built to honor one of the greatest kings of antiquity, Djoser.
Djoser was history's first great pharaoh. He was one of the great builders who helped forge ancient Egypt as we think of it today.
Djoser was one of the most innovative kings that Egypt ever saw.
Who was Djoser, the man behind the legend? To unravel the secrets of this enigmatic pharaoh, we must follow in the footsteps of field Egyptologists and travel back in time to the Egyptian court some 4,700 years ago. We're in Memphis, the capital of pharaonic Egypt, 30 kilometers south of present-day Cairo, nearly 47 centuries ago. All the evidence suggests that Djoser was born here in the city's finest palaces. He was the son of the pharaoh Rasuremwi.
His name means the appearance of the 2 powers. We may also know the name of Djoser's mother, Imhotep, because she was the wife, the queen of Khafre.
At this point, ancient Egypt had only existed for 300 years. Little did the ancient Egyptians know that they would become the longest-lived civilization in antiquity, spanning more than 33 dynasties. The likes of Khufu, Ramses II, Tutankhamun, Cleopatra, and Hatshepsut would not be born until centuries or even millennia later.
It was a strong monarchy whose influence extended as far as the Gaza Strip.
Rasuremwi, Djoser's father, was one of the starting points of a long line that would forever mark the early history of the Egyptian kingdom, the Second Dynasty.
In his reign, there's lots of evidence of fighting and warfare against northerners. This civil strife seems to have been stabilized, seems to have been ended by Djoser's father, Khafre.
The young prince was destined for a brilliant future. It's easy to imagine his life at the court of the most powerful man in ancient Egypt. It was a life of disproportionate opulence, power, and education compared to the rest of the country. It was against this backdrop of political stability that the young Djoser, also known as Djeser, ascended to the Egyptian throne around 2691 BCE.
In Ras Romwe's tomb, seals with the names of Djoser and his mother were found, proving that he did oversee his father's funeral. According to the tradition, whoever managed the funeral of his predecessor became the designated successor.
As pharaoh, Djoser inherited a strong, unified country, not without its share of challenges.
He must have been a soldier because he led expeditions in Sinai, he fought against people there, uprising of tribes, and so forth.
But this time of war doesn't seem to have lasted. He had other plans and big dreams. He wished to continue in his father's footsteps and endow Egypt with its first wonders that would make it a model of civilization, the greatest the earth had ever known.
He was living in a time where Egypt was peaceful, it was rich, and there was a lot of good administrative organization. So really, it was a golden age.
He reinforced the monarchy by building some astounding monuments.
Where now you don't need to think about fighting northerners. Now you think about making a monument that the world had never seen before.
Djoser embarked upon a crazy project to build a funerary complex unlike any other before it. Covering an area of 15 hectares, this city of the dead was to be made more magnificent by the construction of the first pyramid ever built.
This huge step pyramid complex shows us that Djoser was innovative. He was bold, he was creative. He tried to do something that no one had done before.
But Djoser undoubtedly wouldn't have been able to do it without some important allies. People working behind the scenes who would contribute to the success of his reign, his wife, his children, and his right-hand man, Imhotep. The pharaoh seems to have been, above all, a family man who prioritized the women in his life. Evidence of their presence and their place at the king's side has survived the tests of time. Egyptologist Salima Ikram takes us on a tour of the Saqqara burial complex and invites us to look upon these extraordinary relics that date back to more than 4,700 years.
What's amazing here is we still have preserved parts of statues of King Djoser. So we have his feet and maybe also the feet of his other family members, maybe his father, his wife, his mother, his daughter, or even himself shown with the gods. But unfortunately, it's only the feet, but it's still really cool because we have something of Djoser here. You have to imagine 5,000 years ago that there were 4 colossal statues standing here with Djoser sort of in charge of his funerary domain, making sure his pyramid was protected.
The information available about his family is incomplete, but we do know the name of his queen. Her name was Hetepernebti.
We know of Hetepernebti, Djoser's wife, from 2 little inscriptions.
Although Egyptian kings had many wives, what we have from Djoser is the name of only one wife, and she seems to have been also perhaps his half-sister.
In ancient Egypt, kings and queens were considered to be the descendants of the gods. In order to preserve this supreme bond, brothers and sisters were often forced to marry to protect the purity of their divine ancestry. That way, a pair of living gods could procreate and offer the throne of Egypt its next pharaohs. However, according to the information available to archaeologists, Djoser does not appear to have had a son.
There was at least one daughter, Enetkis, and probably a second daughter named Nial-Hathor, but we're not really sure.
In Djoser's time, only men could become pharaohs. As a result, he seems to have reigned all his life knowing that his daughters wouldn't be able to succeed him upon his death. Nevertheless, Djoser devoted his life to promoting the royal family. He even used it to further consolidate his power.
Djoser's queen, like other queens of this time period, seems to have been quite powerful. She seems to have acted as a priestess and certainly was very important.
Women were the guarantors of royal power. The royal bloodline was transmitted through women, hence the importance of the queen, who could perpetuate the legitimacy of her family's power. It's clear that Djoser really relied on his female relatives.
Djoser also had another major ally. This man here, Imhotep. Although the term didn't yet exist at the time, he was what we would call a vizier. He was the second most important person in the kingdom after the pharaoh himself.
For the king, the vizier was his right hand. The vizier carried out all the business of the country so that the king could be focused on his many duties. The king was connected to the gods. He had religious responsibilities. He had other things to think about than the everyday management of the country.
And Imhotep was also a magician, a keeper of secrets, a high priest of Ptah, Re.
But Imhotep was no ordinary vizier. He also had a unique talent for science and architecture.
Imhotep is maybe the first that we know of a kind, the Leonardo da Vinci's of ancient Egypt.
As the overseer of the builders, he was the one who really pushed Egyptian civilization into an era of large-scale constructions. It was an incredible turning point.
Djoser's vision, combined with Imhotep's genius, was the perfect alliance to take Egypt's greatness to never-before-seen heights.
It seems that they were a dynamic duo, that they worked together, linked together as sort of like Batman and Robin.
I can imagine their talks, perhaps in the evening, talking about how to do this or how to do that, and Imhotep answering that this would not be possible, but we may do it in a different way, perhaps drawing a sketch on the sand. It's fascinating.
If Djoser didn't have Imhotep, he wouldn't have been able to run the country and build his step pyramid.
Together, they were poised to achieve great things. But where to start building this gigantic pyramid and burial complex? First, they needed resources. Meredith Brand is an Egyptologist at the American University in Cairo. She has agreed to show us an ancient map showing the borders of Egypt at the time of Djoser. This document gives us insight into the king's epic journey to extract the precious materials needed to complete his pharaonic project.
Djoser went on expeditions to the Sinai in order to get incredibly valuable materials for his economy, copper and turquoise. And this is quite the journey. We know that Djoser lived in Memphis. Memphis is on the west bank of the Nile. So Djoser and his crew would have had to cross the Nile and then go through the desert and then hike the mountains of the Sinai with his team. And in these mountains, they would have found copper and turquoise. And he left an inscription giving his name and showing him as a powerful king of all of Egypt. Then he would have to return back the same way and come to his capital at Memphis with the copper and the turquoise and proceed to use this and the revenue from it to build his step pyramid here in Saqqara.
Saqqara is one of the wonders of ancient Egypt, a gigantic funerary necropolis and a city in itself. Thanks to the prophets from the mines of Sinai and the talent of Imhotep, Djoser's vision was finally made a reality. It surpassed anything that had ever been imagined.
There had never been anything like it before. It covered approximately 15 hectares, whereas we know that some of the major cities were only 6. It was bigger than anything else.
In this complex, in this rectangle, you could put not only the pyramid of Djoser, which is obviously here, but you could put the whole Great Pyramid of Khufu and still leave plenty of space.
The reason this funerary complex has endured to the present day is because its designers, Djoser and Imhotep, built it out of a material that was revolutionary for its time.
It was the first monument ever in the world to be made out of stone. What they wanted to do was basically have what they did in the living city of Memphis to be preserved for eternity. And only stone preserves for eternity.
Memphis, the capital of Djoser and his predecessors. It's hard to tell how large the local population was at the time, but we do know that the pharaoh lived in the most populous city in the kingdom. The purpose of building an enormous funerary complex in the necropolis of Saqqara, just a few kilometers to the south, was to create a kind of vessel that would enable his people to fulfill the purpose of their existence, their journey into the afterlife.
This is the moment of innovation and beginning of a lot of Egyptian ideology.
The ancient Egyptians believed that death was a passage to a place where the gods, the innocent, and the damned all resided, the afterlife. These pieces of papyrus predate Djoser's reign, but they illustrate the concept of this famous journey in the time of the pharaoh. In order to gain access to the afterlife, the dead first had to appear before the god Osiris and await judgment. This trial after death was necessary in order to be reborn and granted eternal life. The ancient Egyptians, Djoser included, believed that each individual was made up of several elements: name, body, heart, and spirit. This spirit, which they called Ka, was the essential component that allowed them to pass in front of Osiris and hope for the right to eternal life.
The Ka is your vital force. It's your life force. Now, the king was called the Ka of the living. Basically, his vital force was essential to and contained the life force of all the people of his kingdom. So if you get the king and his palace resurrected, the entire set of people who lived with him, who served with him, would resurrect along with him.
The physical body of the king was reflective of the physical body of Egypt. If the king was strong, then Egypt was strong. If the king was weak, the country would fall into disaster. It would not flourish. There would be no floods. There would be no food. There would be no livestock, and enemies would take over.
In their efforts to reinforce the strength of Egypt and its pharaoh, Djoser and Imhotep came up with an innovative idea that would leave its mark on pharaonic civilization and the history of humankind.
What they did is they put a giant hieroglyph of the idea to resurrect in the middle of a simulacrum palace that would effect everybody in Egypt to live forever with the king and his soul.
The hieroglyph is this colossal edifice here, Djoser's pyramid. Slightly longer than a soccer pitch and slightly taller than the Arc de Triomphe in Paris, Djoser's pyramid is a monument unlike any other.
The pyramid represents the king ascending to resurrect in the afterlife.
It's the centerpiece of the funerary complex, the cockpit of his ship bound for eternity, the paradise so coveted by the ancient Egyptians and Pharaoh Djoser himself. Its design also includes certain symbols that are more earthly.
The step pyramid itself marks the unification of the country and the stability of the country. In fact, that may be why we have the step pyramid in the first place.
Innovative and visionary, Djoser got off the beaten paths and stood out from his predecessors. He founded the Third Dynasty, and with it, the Old Kingdom, one of the most prosperous periods of pharaonic civilization. The Old Kingdom saw not only the advent of Djoser's reign, but also those of the great Khufu and Khafre.
Djoser's complex is not just a funerary complex, but is a manifestation of royal kingship, which set the pattern for the next 2,000 years.
The construction of this stone colossus gives archaeologists some insight into the pharaoh's personality. A perfect blend of human genius and technical prowess, this architectural miracle is the product of a remarkable mind.
This monument tells us about Djoser, really. It tells us that he was an innovator. He was not afraid to take risks.
He's also effective, intelligent, and an excellent administrator because he was able to achieve his dreams. So it shows us that he had all the hallmarks that we would think of as an excellent ruler.
This pyramid was the first true monument to the greatness of the Egyptian king. He wasn't just a king, he was a god.
The pyramid was to be Djoser's tomb. It had to be visible for miles around, so that the power of the pharaoh and that of Egypt would radiate to all four corners of the kingdom.
It would have been blinding in the sunshine, like the sun on newly fallen snow.
A monument frozen in time, a constant reminder of the greatness of ancient Egypt and its pharaoh, Djoser. Although the white limestone that would later cover Egypt's famous pyramids no longer blinds observers today, the sheer size of the edifice is still impressive. Inside the complex, everything was designed to pay homage to the god Djoser.
Here we are in the main passageway that leads us into the great courtyard in Djoser's Step Pyramid complex. This is where people would come in and out of. All the priests who came here, in, out, and also maybe people who came to praise Djoser, to offer to him, to worship him, would come in through this one single entrance.
Within this enclosure, right next to the pyramid, is what's known as the Serdab, a magical place that seems to invite curious passers-by to look through two holes in its walls. On the other side is one of the most beautiful treasures of Djoser's reign, his statue.
The statue inside shows King Djoser, and he's got this great mustache, a long false beard, and a very determined expression. And of course, we don't know 100% if that's what he looked like, but probably it was modeled on him, and like any portrait, it was a little bit nicer than what he actually was. These holes are not for us to look in. They're actually for the statue of Djoser to look out, because they're organized from his perspective. Because this is where people would come, they would make offerings, they would pray to the king, and really where he would hold court for eternity.
This statue is actually a copy. The original is here at the Cairo Museum, and a close analysis of it reveals many surprises about the pharaoh.
This place is full of artifacts, but this is one of its masterpieces. This is the original statue of Djoser. It's the first life-size statue in ancient Egypt. This was a one-to-one image of the king Djoser. This is sort of what he would have looked like. This is his size. It depicts him sitting on a throne, wrapped in his headset robe. He's celebrating the jubilee of a long reign. This is a king in celebration mode. So this probably is him towards the end of his reign, once he's celebrated this monumentous occasion that marked him as a great king with a long, illustrious career.
But upon closer inspection of the statue, Meredith Brand reveals its most incredible secret. The frieze at its feet bears the pharaoh's name, and, against all odds, it's not Djoser that's written on it.
On the front of this statue is a carving that lets us know who this king is. And it says the name Necherhi-Het. This name is not Djoser.
Necherhi-Het means the one with divine flesh, the divine body, and undoubtedly the divine belly.
Where did this name come from? How can this discrepancy be explained?
Throughout his reign, he was known as Necherhi-Het. He was never known as Djoser. It wasn't until later in Egyptian history that Egyptian writers called him Djoser.
It was a name that was given to him later. Djoser means the holy or the sacred.
Why was he given this name? To find out, we must travel 800 kilometers south of Saqqara to Elephantine on the island of Sahel. There, we join American Egyptologist Meredith Brand to learn more about the origin of Djoser's name.
This is a giant granite boulder on Sahel Island. The hieroglyphs are pecked into this granite stone, and so they don't have a lot of fine, delicate details, but they tell us a tale of King Djoser.
The story tells of a crucial chapter in Djoser's life. a monument that would mark a turning point in his reign and make him the savior of an entire people.
There was a 7-year famine, and this happened in year 18 of Djoser's reign. And for 7 years, the Nile didn't come. Everyone was waiting, and there was no flood. So the crops were failing, people were starving.
The land of the pharaohs was dependent on the Nile. Without this natural artery, the Egyptian civilization would never have been able to survive in the middle of this arid desert. The story goes that when faced with this disaster, Djoser asked his right-hand man, Imhotep, for advice.
Imhotep decides that he's going to go to the temple of Thoth in Hermopolis. He wanted to find out where the Nile flood originates so he can find some way to get the Nile to flood again.
What follows is an extraordinary tale of Imhotep searching through the archives of Thoth, the god of knowledge and wisdom. In the course of his investigations, Imhotep discovered that the source of the Nile was at Elephantine, on the very spot where this stele was placed. This was the land of the guardian of the river's source, the god with the head of a ram and the body of a human, Khnum.
It comes from the god Khnum, sitting on his seat in the island of Elephantine, where there's a bunch of caverns underneath, and this is where Khnum has the gates for the flood. So if he can somehow make offerings and appease the god Khnum, then the flood would come. So Imhotep goes back to Djoser and says, okay, we have to do this. We have to make offerings to Khnum.
An astute leader, Djoser knew the importance of listening to those with essential knowledge. He trusted Imhotep and decided to take his advice. The pharaoh went to Elephantine in person to present the finest things the kingdom had to offer to the god Khnum.
Bread, beer, meat, all the good things that any god could ever want. This is the king, and he's burning incense. This is an incense burner, making offerings to the god.
But that's not all. Imhotep warned him that to appease the wrath of the god Khnum, he must build an edifice in his honor.
If Djoser built a temple to Khnum and supplied it with regular offerings, then the god would open up the flood and the land would be prosperous. So Imhotep tells this to Djoser, and Djoser says, okay, let's do this. Imhotep, you know what you're doing. And he goes and builds this temple, and lo and behold, the rivers come, the flood arrives, and the people are happy.
According to some Egyptologists, it was after this extraordinary event that Pharaoh Necherichet earned the nickname of Djoser, or Holy. But the story of Djoser's rescue of the Egyptian people, as recounted on this stele, raises some questions. It was not engraved at the time of the event, but rather much later.
This text was actually written more than 2,500 years after Djoser. It was written during the Ptolemaic period. And we know this because the language of this text, the writing, the grammar, the vocabulary, all fits with the Ptolemaic language, which is quite different from the language spoken 2,500 years before in the time of Djoser.
The Ptolemaic period was the last of the 33 dynasties of pharaonic civilization. It was the time of Ptolemy and Cleopatra. On what did they base this story? Was the account of Djoser rescuing his people from famine actually true?
One of the delightful mysteries about this text is, was there actually a famine for 7 years in the reign of Djoser? We don't really know the answer to this, but the fact that it's remembered 2,500 years later as a story opens up some interesting possibilities. It could be that maybe there was a famine in the time of Djoser, and that this was a national memory of a time of strife and trouble.
But according to archaeologists, it's very likely that this story was made up. It's believed to have been invented by those who had it engraved on this stele. But why?
It's more of a cautionary tale that if you don't support Khnum and you don't support the temple, then maybe there won't be a flood. They learned it in the time of Djoser, so remember this lesson and make offerings to the god Khnum.
At any rate, this story illustrates the importance that Djoser and his vizier Imhotep had in the minds of their descendants even after 2,500 years.
They became legendary figures to the ancient Egyptians.
together, they forged a new Egypt. They created architecture, iconography, all kinds of things and ideas that, in fact, persisted and became the form of what we see now as pharaonic Egypt.
This image of living gods was already present during the reign of Djoser. Of course, the pharaoh was considered to be a de facto deity, but he wasn't the only one.
Imhotep became so famous that he had a cult all of his own later on. But we know first about Imhotep because, very strangely, his name is carved on the pedestal of a statue that is for Djoser.
This image stayed with them until their death, which remains a mystery.
We know that Imhotep lived after Djoser. Imhotep's name is written on ceilings that were found in the pyramid of the successor of Djoser. So we know Imhotep was involved with another step pyramid in Saqqara.
As for Djoser, when did he die? What caused the death of this great pharaoh?
We don't have any documentation about Djoser's last days, but we can think about what it would have been. When he died, there would have been a grand funeral with pomp and circumstance and great mourning, so that this is when, of course, the pyramid complex would have been activated and turned into a potent machine for the rebirth and resurrection of the king.
Archaeologists have yet to unravel the circumstances of Djoser's death, but that's not the only mystery they face. How long did he reign?
There are a few written mentions of Djoser that note the years of his reign, but the problem is they don't always give the same dates.
One of the biggest issues with understanding the date of Djoser's reign is that the record keeping wasn't clear in the time of Djoser. They didn't have a consistent way of counting the year that was the exact same for every single king. So when we look back on these records, it can be quite confusing.
One of the documents attesting to the length of Djoser's reign is this invaluable text, one of the greatest archaeological treasures in pharaonic history. The Turin Papyrus. This one-of-a-kind piece is on display here at the Egizio Museum in Turin, Italy. Egyptologist Cedric Gobeil joins us there to help us solve the mystery of the length of Djoser's reign.
Pharaoh Djoser is here, just after the title King of Upper and Lower Egypt, written in red, and right after that we have the length of his reign. Surprisingly, according to this, he reigned for only 19 years.
This would mean that Djoser would have had his pharaonic funerary complex built in just 19 years. Egyptologist Mark Lenner and many other experts believe this is simply impossible.
Can you imagine doing all of this in 19 years? The step pyramid itself, just the pyramid, shows 6 different stages of development. If you divide 6 into 19, you get a major redoing of the royal tomb every 3 years.
Considering all his architectural achievements, it's very likely that his reign lasted for more than just 19 years. Other sources mention King Djoser's reign having lasted for 29 or 30 years. The fact that a whole decade is missing here could be explained by a simple scribal error. It's not uncommon for Egyptian sources to omit a few tens. It's quite common in ancient Egyptian accounts. So instead of seeing 19 here, I'd suggest we should read it as 29, which would make more sense.
Pharaoh Djoser most likely reigned for either 19 or 29 years. We may never know for sure, but the scientific community agrees that his reign came to an end in 2648 BCE, when his successor ascended to the Egyptian throne. The identity of the next pharaoh is not certain, but is believed to have been either Sennacht or Seremret.
We know basically nothing of the end of Djoser's life. We know that he died and his successor came to the throne, but the exact events surrounding his death are completely unclear. We don't have the evidence to tell us any more about what could have happened to him.
Nor is there any evidence of conspiracy or a violent death. In any case, it probably took at least a few decades to build such an enormous complex. It still hasn't been fully uncovered yet. New tunnels were still being discovered in the early 2000s.
In an attempt to understand the final moments of this mythical pharaoh, American Egyptologist Mark Lenner takes us into a closely guarded location. We were given special permission from the Egyptian authorities to enter this forbidden sanctuary, which is closed to the general public. This is the innermost section of the pyramid, the tomb of Djoser himself. The answers to some of the questions about the pharaoh's death might very well lie here.
We are going deeper and deeper underneath the step pyramid of Djoser, and we're going through very narrow corridors cut right through the living rock.
Djoser's pyramid is basically solid stepped stone, but all the activities underground and the way it is laid out and the decorations give the impression of a royal palace for part of it.
The Palace of the Beyond. Mark has been here before, but he still feels the same wave of emotion each time he descends beneath the pyramid.
Amazing. Truly amazing.
Located 28 meters underground, this spectacular room is one of the largest in the pharaoh's apartments.
We have Djoser's name. His Horus name is an incarnation of the god Horus, the falcon god of kingship. And here's his name written in the rectangle, Nedjerichet. The rectangle actually symbolizes a palace. So this is his palace. It's a simulacrum palace for eternity. As far as we can understand, they thought that by simulating a primeval palace here in the underground, it would help Djoser to reign in a palace on the other side of death.
One critical detail helps us to understand the vital importance of this room within the pyramid and Djoser's burial complex as a whole, which was a vessel for his journey to the afterlife.
Another important point about this chamber, it is directly on line with what's called the King's Serdab outside the pyramid on the north side.
The Serdab is located outside the pyramid. It's there that we find the statue of Djoser, the original of which is at the Cairo Museum. Positioned at a 13-degree angle, it was designed as a launch pad to propel the pharaoh on his final journey. The story is told on the walls of the Palace of the Afterlife.
This is kind of the last step of Djoser, but they render this in another way, almost like a comic book, like Asterix and Obelix. They actually show Djoser in these doorways, walking through the ritual that will eject him to the northern stars. You can see that over here. For all the world, he's an ancient astronaut, ready for takeoff to the circumpolar stars that they call the imperishable ones, the stars that never rise or set as they go around the North Star.
These stars also appear on the stone blocks that formed part of a vault in Djoser's tomb.
Look at the stars on these blocks. They're beautiful. And they're the oldest known stars, probably from a ceiling, in a long tradition of star-studded ceilings in ancient Egyptian architecture.
They have special meaning, referring directly to the beliefs of Djoser and the ancient Egyptians.
It's the goddess Nut, the sky goddess, who is at once the king's mother, but also his celestial destination. It's womb and tomb combined. By putting the pharaoh's mummy under a star-studded ceiling, you are putting him in a womb that ensures his rebirth. Tomb and womb always went together for the ancient Egyptians.
These blocks would have originally been located above what is the most incredible room in the pyramid. This enormous well, some 30 meters deep, Djoser's burial chamber.
Right here, we're next to the granite vault where they buried King Djoser, Nedjerichet. This is the masterpiece of the whole pyramid complex. It's the centerpiece. This vault is like a battery that powered the whole pyramid complex. When they put Djoser's remains inside, they sealed him in with a granite plug, cylindrical shaped, that alone weighed 3.5 tons. The plug put in place, and all this packing around it, it was literally like a battery that powered the whole spiritual resurrection of Djoser, so he could shoot up to the circumpolar stars and reign forever in his simulacrum royal palace.
After being buried, Djoser would reign between here and the afterlife for all eternity. But when the first Egyptologists entered the tomb, they came to the crushing realization that they were not the first to visit the tomb. Thousands of years earlier, Djoser's final resting place had been ravaged by his greatest enemies, grave robbers.
Now, when archaeologists came in the early 20th century, they went inside and found human remains when they were rummaging around in the rubble fill of the vault. These human remains, possibly that was Djoser.
It was a tragic ending for the man who laid the foundations of a phenomenal civilization.
We don't know where Djoser's mummy is today. It probably disappeared a long time ago, but his name lives on forever.
Djoser wanted to give Egypt an extraordinary tool to assert its greatness in the centuries and millennia to come. Not only did he achieve this in his own lifetime, but it was also carried on in subsequent generations.
He marked a turning point in the history of ancient Egypt, as his funerary art was copied and built upon by the pharaohs who followed him in the 4th dynasty.
Without Djoser's vision and the genius of his architect, Imhotep, the magnificent pyramids of Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure never would have seen the light of day. Pharaoh Djoser became not only a role model for his successors, but also a compass pointing the way for the whole world.
Djoser probably acted like a kind of magnet. From the end of the 5th dynasty onwards, the pharaohs began to settle in the direct vicinity of Djoser.
The last king of the 5th dynasty, Unis, put his pyramid at another corner of the Djoser complex. People wanted to be close to this complex. It had what Egyptians today would call baraka in Arabic. It had a special spiritual blessing, and they wanted to be near that.
But the pharaohs weren't the only ones who wanted to be buried in Djoser's funerary complex. Kamil Kiraskevich is a Polish Egyptologist who's been excavating the area around the pyramid for more than 40 years. He recently discovered this extraordinary burial site, which reveals just how much Djoser was loved and admired.
It's only towards the end of the 5th dynasty, so several centuries after the death of Djoser, that ordinary people were started to be buried there. But on the other hand, they were not completely ordinary people. You had to be very rich to be able to afford a tomb like this. So the people buried here were from the uppermost strata of the Egyptian society.
This tomb tells the amazing story of Merefnebef, a civil servant who rose from the bottom to the position of vizier 300 years after Djoser reigned. When he was alive, he dreamed of becoming part of this otherworldly city designed and created by the illustrious Pharaoh.
It is the visible presence of a dead king. That's why he and his colleagues decided to be buried here, to rest, to live eternally, in a sense, in the shadow of Djoser.
In the accessible areas, subsequent generations marked their respect for the great king by engraving it on the rock.
These graffiti are extraordinary because they show how powerful Djoser was and how much his memory lived on over 1,000 years after he died. So for the Egyptians, he was a superhero.
Without his pyramid, it's very likely that this man's reign would have been erased from the records of the past and forever forgotten. But his vision, talent, and resources earned him a place among history's greatest pharaohs and the pioneers of an exceptional civilization.
It's so unfortunate that we have such little evidence of Djoser other than the step pyramid, and it makes us want to know more.
We've only uncovered 5 to 10% of everything the site has to offer us. With regards to the Third Dynasty, any new information we can recover could potentially provide us with more pieces of the puzzle to Djoser's reign.
Day by day, Mark, Salima, Meredith, and Camille all strive to unveil some of the many mysteries still hidden by the Saqqara necropolis. It will take many more centuries and many generations of Egyptologists to unlock all its secrets. The secrets of an eternal pharaoh who contributed to the glory of antiquity's greatest civilization.